It's WG, bring you SMB, and welcome to the best and most comprehensive tier list out there. The summer update is here, so now we had the chance to get our hands on every single character, and we'll also be ranking every single character. The way we do that is by the ABCs. We start with Acapella, we end with Yggdrasil. You'll have timestamps on the timeline so you can jump to wherever you want, but I would recommend watching it all so you have like a comprehensive idea of who stands where. You might even learn a thing or two about some units you haven't yet had the chance to use. As usual, this is a great effort and I would greatly appreciate either a like, a comment, or even a subscription if you haven't yet. Those would greatly help me out, but without further ado, let's actually get into the tier list itself and into the tiers. So let's go from bottom to the top. We have the Cain tier. Cain tier defines basically trash, as in units you're never going to use in no scenario whatsoever besides maybe fight 1-5 in the tutorial, right? That is the Cain tier. I will also obviously talk more about why certain units belong there and the like. Then we have the C tier, which is above Cain, which are units that are going to see some play, but overall they're at least better than useless, alright? Then we have the B tier, is like your worst of the bunch SSRs. Some characters that might be not having yet shown promise in any piece of content and the like. Then the A tier above that is like your foundation with which you're going to build most teams, what most players have access to, and also units that just perform overall pretty good. And then on top of that you have the S tier, which is like cream of the crop of the SSR that do stand apart from the A tier as well as the B and especially C tier, with then lastly the places 6 to 10 and then the big top 5 at the very top. So we've made away with the ancestor tier and every single unit is going to get ranked right here. Lastly, every single unit is going to be ordered in their own tier. So there's going to be a high S tier, mid S tier, low S tier. The top 5, the one at the very left is going to be number 1, and then the one at the end is going to be number 5. Same for 6 to 10. You get the deal. Alright, now without further ado, let's get into the tier list, and to the surprise of absolutely no one, Acapella is in the top 5. I would even say she is the best unit in the game. So let's go a bit through the reasoning. Not only do I have max HP based healing during ult, but by far the strongest ult in the entire game, because not only do you get blood soul recovery, which is the resource you use to cast your ultimates, meaning you'll be able to cast more ultimates than someone that doesn't use Acapella, you also gain the chance to give a crit rate buff, a physical and also a magical damage dealing increase buff. And the important part here is that Acapella's buffs are unique in that they don't really overlap with anything else, so she pretty much works with everybody in kind of every single team comp. I don't think there's much to say about Acapella, and Acapella is who you pick from your 150 selector no matter what, right? No matter what, your 150 selector should go to Acapella if you don't own her yet. Now, someone that might be a bit controversial, and that is going to be I.Agares. Now, I.Agares has been underestimated a lot in the beginning, but now he's seen a resurgence. Let's talk a bit about the content where he has become incredibly useful. So you can use him for story pushes, you can use him, or you could have used him for the prophecy, the very first one we had. In Clan Hunt, he had a lot of a glow up, and also in general, any piece that requires AoE damage, because what he does is big AoE, then a burn. I like to call it a burn, right? He's I.Agares, he does fire. I don't like to call it affliction, I like to call it a burn. Fight me. And then, the reason though why he is that strong is because of the existence of a single Transcendant. I can already think about it on your own, but it is really a night and day difference between having a Transcendant Hati and not having one. So if you do not own a Transcendant Hati, I.Agares would probably drop down from what this is going to be high A tier more towards like the middle / end of A, potentially even into the B tier. But this synergy is just too strong. The combo of starting the afflictions with I.Agares and then exploding those afflictions with Hati, it just works really well. Next up, Aiona, our SR healer. Now, Aiona took a little bit of a hit, and that is because before we had Seth, Stereite at the top when it came to healing, then in Edina, so Seth, Stereite, Edina, or like both at the same time, and then you had Aiona. And when you were forced to play 3-piece content or 3-team content and you didn't have a Seth, then you had to use Aiona. Now, unfortunately for her, Fleeting Bella exists, so if you get your hands on a Fleeting Bella, Edina, and then also a Stereoid Aiona, then you're not really going to use her much, but that doesn't at least subtract as much from her value, but she is going to go from like a high A tier to like a low / medium A tier character. Now, Ami. I don't know about Ami. I gotta be honest with you, she doesn't really do a whole lot. The biggest problem is that while you upgrade her ultimate, you do not increase the duration of the attack speed buff. You only make the attack speed buff itself stronger. And the big problem with the attack speed buff is attack speed buffs only primarily work on characters that do a lot of damage with their basic attacks. For a character that has a powerful ult, attack speed doesn't really make a difference. Obviously, attack speed also works better with characters that have a good special, but usually it still ends up being the same. So attack speed is like one of the worst things you could buff, especially because she is solo buffing. She's just buffing attack speed. Furthermore, we don't even know if it's like a major, a minor attack speed, because it's like in percentages rather than her giving a straight buff. So you actually have to invest into her to get that attack buff higher. And then also, while her linking is quite nice, what are you going to do if the rest of your team dies and your 2 linking units survive? They're going to die too, right? So Ami, she hasn't seen any play anywhere. Yeah, it's hard to find a spot for her at the moment, but there's still obviously potential for her to like somehow make it out of there and become relevant again. But for now, she is a B tier and even towards the end of B tier. Now, Augustine. Augustine has, to a degree, 2 functions. Very simple. Number 1, PvP content. In PvP content, he is a marksman hard counter. What that means is he has the ability to pull in a unit passively or also with his ultimate, and if you pull in a marksman, you're going to take advantage of the effective range. Effective range says the closer a unit is to a marksman, the less damage the marksman deals. The further they are away, the more damage the marksman deals to that unit. So the ability to pull in a unit and pretty much get into their personal space heavily reduces the damage you're going to take from a marksman. So that is why Augustine is used. You can, for example, use him to counter Noahs, you can use him to counter Van Helsings, and that's where he shines. So basically in the Gauntlet / Crucible PvP section, pretty good. Outside of that, he is a nice half moon, and if you don't have another option, he can be somewhat of a burst DPS with his ultimate, but his multipliers aren't high enough to like qualify him as a real DPS. And the other scenario where you do use him is when you, for whatever reason, want to bunch up a bunch of enemies and then enemies are like really far off. Then you can, for example, send in an Augustine, bunch the first enemies around Augustine, and then use Augustine's ult to pull in the ranged units, which is also combined with a stun, so it can help with shutdowns, though it is only a 1-person stun, which is the reason why he is currently an A, and you'll see he'll move a bit further down in the tier list. Now, first character in Cain tier isn't actually Cain, but Baphomet. Baphomet, he doesn't see play. Like, you're never gonna run into a scenario where you're like, I wish I could have used Baphomet, because he just doesn't have any place where he's really good. And the most notable thing about Baphomet is his talent, where he has a 5% chance to inflict a bleed if someone hits him, but the chance is too low, and the proc, it does not make a difference. So Baphomet, Cain tier. Bella. Bella is actually also a top 5 unit, and let's go through a couple of the reasons why, okay? So you have a tank that doesn't have to tank herself, but actually summons puppets. She can summon up to 3 with her ultimate going up to 4. She personally heals those puppets, turning her into a self-healing tank, while also summons having one of the most broken interactions with pretty much any single boss stage I've ever seen, and that is most stages count summons as different entities, like for your team. So for example, if a boss attacks your team, there's a chance it's going to attack a summon rather than an actual teammate. There is the interaction with 9-8, where if the boss swallows a summon, the boss gets stunned and doesn't get the bonuses. So these summons are really, really powerful. Another thing that comes to mind is, like, for example, 13-8, where you can target summons with your debuffs. It is really, really fancy, and that also leads into her viability in PvP. In PvP, enemy ultimates can target your summons rather than your teammates. So what's going to end up happening is, for example, a Lorelei could waste her single target ultimate on a Bella summon, which is one of the best trade-offs ever. And then on top of all of that, you also have the Silver Shadow Chronometer artifact, which further heals Bella when summons appear/disappear. And then also you have the level 5, where you're going to be able to regenerate blood souls, which again is the currency for ultimates, should a summon be summoned, but level 5 is still too far away, and we also don't quite know how strong that buff is. I'll let you know as soon as I find out. So yeah, Bella, top 5 unit in the game. She is by far the strongest and most dominant tank at the moment, and also with the added ability to run 2 of the same character, she hasn't taken any hit at all, and you can just run a Bella and a Fleeting Bella together in one team. Now, Cain is in the Cain tier. Let's go a bit through the reasons. So, Cain has a Cain has a talent that is super selfish. Cain only gains a attack speed boost for just himself when he kills something or when something gets killed, which means absolutely selfish ability and not even that strong on Cain. What Cain then also does is he attacks and he summons like little mines he places around enemies. The issue is these mines are what he wants on the field so that his ultimate can deal more damage, which sounds great. But your teammates can also preemptively detonate those mines, which means he like weakens his own ult by having your teammates destroy his mines while also having a super selfish ability, and then you have like the smallest range you've ever seen on an ultimate, just like one line, right? So Cain, no, that's the reason why he has his own tier. And yeah, Cain, right? All right, now Cecia. Cecia is still worthy of the S tier. What puts her apart? Where is she good? So Cecia has a channeling ultimate, which means once you trigger it, it's going to go on for like 12 seconds. She has incredibly high multipliers on her ultimate, and that only gets enhanced if you have 4 summons on the field. The way you can get 4 summons, we've already talked about it, is by having Bella summon 3, then using Bella's ultimate, which makes Cecia's ultimate attacks bounce even more. So what you kind of get is like a machine gun of AoE damage destruction. Cecia is a menace. If you play a Bella Cecia combo, you're not going to be lacking for AoE damage. So that is why she still deserves that top spot or that heightened spot in that S tier. Now, Clive Jr. is alright. Like, you can use him, you can, especially early on, use him quite effectively to use the summons to like distract enemies, but if you have a Bella, Clive is just irrelevant. That's just the way it goes. Now, Clive rather than Clive Jr. What Clive does is he gives himself 25% lifesteal, and the only scenario you're going to be using Clive in is if for whatever reason you're forced to play a full assassin team, like Knight of the Hunt, and you are missing, let's say, a Nicole, right? Then he can replace the Nicole, but there are enough rush assassins that you don't need a Clive if you have every SSR, but if you don't, you will be able to find use for him, which is why he's in C rather than in Cain tier. Dalcarlo, 3rd best unit in the game. Yeah. Let's go over the reasons why. So you have incredible range. You have a Enchanter with, you could say, marksman range without any of the drawbacks. Dalcarlo does not have effective range, which means no matter how close the enemies are to Dalcarlo, she'll always be dealing her own damage, neither more, neither less. As well as this incredible range can be used to cast her ultimate, which is a really big circle. It doesn't look that big, but most of the time you'll be able to hit 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 enemies at the same time, with each of them getting 1000+% damage. So big AoE, the more targets there are, she can pretty much hit everyone for like the Fist of Equality with really great damage. And then on top of that, you also morph the enemies. Morphing the enemies is a hard stun, which means it cancels channeling. It also hard locks the enemies from actually attacking you, buying your tank precious time to stay alive. And she's just so useful in shutting anything out that is annoying. You have these guys that make your ults cost more, shut down. You have the mages that summon fireballs, shut down. You have the birds that fly into your team formation, shut down. So yeah, it's just a huge shutdown. And on top of all of that, you also have the reduced damage dealt debuff, as well as the increased damage taken debuff that not just also get added on top. So yeah, Dalcarlo is a really strong unit, and you should not underestimate her. She's also one of those units I would say is fine buying with your spirit coin currency, the 200, to work towards level 200 and even potentially into like the spirit siphon territory. Alright, next up, Darcias. Now, if you say I.Agares, then you also have to say Darcias. What makes Darcias so strong is her special. Her special allows her to apply an AoE bleed every 2 basic attacks, as well as also double the bleed that is already existing on enemies. So once again, Darcias, I.Agares, and Hati, the triple AoE danger combo. That is what you're going for. I.Agares, Darcias plus Hati. It's been used in pretty much every single kind of like boss damage deal event. She's been used in multiple clan hunt teams. She has proven her worth, and on top of that, you also have the ability to restore health on her on her special if you hit targets that are afflicted with the debuff. So you have like self-sustain added on top, as well as also her being a low moon, so she can work as like your lead into a Hati / I.Agares for the full moon. So yeah, that is Darcias for you. Then again, her value drops if you do not own a Hati, but once you do, it's going to the moon. But even then, she can fight for herself even if you do not own a Hati. Now, Empousa we can put solely into C tier. She doesn't do a whole bunch, but what she does do is she can add some AoE damage. So if you, for example, struggling with the very first or the second gear boss and you don't have someone with a rather cheap ult to do some AoE damage, you can use her. Though we are all just waiting for Transcendent Empousa to actually get shit going. She doesn't really do a whole bunch. Alright, Edina. Edina, we already talked about her. Edina is, at the end of the day, just a better version of Aiona. Whatever Aiona does, Edina does better. Even though she costs 4 rather than 3, she can apply more healing. She has healing on her special, so every couple basic attacks she heals. And she also applies reduced damage taken. So Edina, a pretty straightforward healer, but also just a healer. Now we get to already the interesting stuff, and that is Fleeting Bella. Currently, Fleeting Bella is a top 10 unit in the game, and the reason for that is the synergy between not only Fleeting Bella and every single basic attackers, as well as 2 in particular, which are going to be Van Helsing and Lorelei. Van Helsing and Lorelei become incredibly dangerous if you boost them with a Fleeting Bella before going into their ultimates. The added 50% attack speed buff is not to be underestimated. The major attack speed buff that we already talked about coming from Ami, it is not to be underestimated. It turns Lorelei, it turns Yggdrasil into Van Helsing, it turns them into shredders. They just delete everything. And that's not even it, right? You get the major attack speed buff, you take 25% of her own attack and add it on top of the other unit's attack, which means your units, most of the time, your attack is going to be around equal, so your units are going to get a 25% attack boost, which is ridiculous. And then also, you get a further increase on extra damage dealt with basic attacks. So if you combine her with a Van Helsing, every time Van Helsing hits a target, and then with a 0.4 second cooldown, she'll be adding extra damage on top of the damage that she's already giving, as well as also, now the most important part, she has major damage up, or better said, all damage up major, which refers to a damage increase to any damage type by 45%. And that is the reason why she's up there. That is the reason why she's so good. And Fleeting Bella's banner is still ongoing right now. If you don't know who to pull for, go for 4 Fleeting Bellas. There you go. All right, Friedrich. Now, let's have a look at Friedrich. He's like middle of the pack A. So one of the reasons why he's middle of the pack A is because another tank, which we'll be talking about too, has kind of gained in popularity. But overall, what does Friedrich do and why does he deserve A? If you don't have a Bella or don't want to use Bella or can't use a Bella, whenever that scenario happens, and you don't have an Ami, then Friedrich is one of your best options. He is incredibly good as solo sustain, so he'll be able to take enemy fire, and if you are facing magic damage, he's even better, because if he is shielded, he reduces his own magic damage taken. Now, one of the other reasons why he's so good is because of the synergy between himself and Starry-Eyed Aiona. Starry-Eyed Aiona applies a buff that makes shield stronger, while Friedrich can apply a shield to himself through special, so every basic attacks, as well as also with the ultimate, so that is why he's here. He is just overall a very solid unit, but nothing super special in particular. He's just really good at keeping himself alive. Alright, Gadric, as great as it sounds to have stinky aura and reduce physical damage taken by 15%, he's just trash, alright? You're not going to use him. Next up, we have another target for Fleeting Bella that might be even more dangerous than a Lorelei for most of you, and that is Jinxed Gilrain. Gilrain has the ability to not only on battle start gain 150% attack speed, but also do that every time he ults. Now imagine that with an extra 50% attack speed, with extra 45% damage, with extra damage on basic attack, with extra attack on top, you get the deal, right? So Gilrain, he's just a very solid assassin. He hits so fast, he does so much damage, and especially when you need to shut down a singular or like a couple enemies in like the backline, just send them in, rush them in, and then you can also use his ultimate to reposition as well as hard stun if you need to cancel a channeling ability or the like. Goldland, pretty face Goldland also goes into Cain tier. He doesn't do anything. You don't want to use him. Quite straightforward. Now Hati is like middle of the pack B. To a degree she got better because you can now run Hati, anti-Hati, but overall she doesn't really do a whole lot. Like yes, she charges in and applies attack damage or like damage dealt down, which means the unit that she hits will deal 30% less damage, but that's only for 6 seconds. And at the start of a battle, units don't usually tend to do their biggest burst. It takes them like 5 to 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds before you really want that buff active. If Hati's all damage down debuff was permanent, now this would be a whole different story. Yes, you can also reapply it with the ultimate, but it is a very costly ultimate without really any crazy paybacks. So Hati is just a good unit to have. You can use her as an assassin, but there's nothing that truly sets her apart, which is why she's kind of just made it into the B tier. Now for something that might already be a little bit controversial to all of you, we have I.Agares. I.Agares also goes into S tier. Now hear me out on this one. Yes, you can use him as a tank in the front line, and then he'll die, and then he'll revive, and then he'll get like the extra damage buff. And then you will be able to use the half moon for free. The problem is it takes a lot of setup, it's a bit awkward to use, and you are running into real trouble when he dies once and then he just dies again after, right? Like, you have to be very careful and try to let I.Agares die once and then never again. And also the reason why it's not as effective to have him die early is because of his talent, where he naturally gains increased damage the longer the fight goes on. So his most powerful state is, I think it's like 30 seconds into the fight. So if I.Agares has died once, 30 seconds into the fight, he's then at his most powerful state. And yeah, when you get him going, when you can use him in a piece of content, he shreds, right? He does incredible damage. His design is awesome. That shouldn't really be a consideration, but we have to admit it here. And he's not a bad unit by any means. Keep in mind, just because he's an S doesn't make him any worse, alright? But he's mostly a PvP menace, right? PvP menace, a bit more awkward to use, but also has seen play in Clan Hunt, in Prophecy. So it's not like Night at the Hunt, right? It's not like he is useless, alright? Jestel. Now, Jestel we're going to be putting into low A. The reason why we put Jestel in low A is because not only is she a perfect tank for you to start off with, like the moment you start out, you can just use Jestel as a tank until you get Bella, Friedrich, Theophane, Ami, but that is also, I guess you could say, the drawback. So she's really good at sustaining physical damage because that's based off a passive, and she'll also be able to give herself increased shields, but there's just better tanks, right? There is just better tanks. The moment you get a Theophane, a Friedrich, a Bella, a Ami, you aren't going to use her as much anymore unless you're talking about her ability to move around on the battlefield as well as taunt. So what we've seen during the clan hunt is the ability to jump into a pack of enemies, taunt them, and then jump again and pretty much start bunching up enemies, which allows you to do huge AoE damage on one target. So at least that's where she is useful, though Theophane, he kinda does it better. Okay, Joan. In my opinion, Joan is only low A tier. Let me actually make you a proposition. Imagine a world in which Joan is a tank with one less cost on the ultimate being a low moon. Joan would be absolutely broken. Absolutely, utterly broken. She would be up there in the top 5/top 10. But that's also why she's not as good, and that's because she is a fighter. She's a fighter rather than a tank, so she cannot solo frontline tank. And also the biggest drawback though is induction isn't as good. Induction doesn't really have a dedicated place, a dedicated space in the game. You can hit the units and yes, you can stun them, works great in story, works great in tower, doesn't work on bosses, and then what are you gonna do? Right? What are you gonna do? Though when it comes to damage, Joan can still deal out a lot of AoE damage and she is nice, but especially all those that ranked her in like the S tier for the beginning of the game, I could never understand it, but I do believe she is a good unit, and if you like Joan, you are still very much fine. Okay, Jinxed Selena. Now, Jinxed Selena we're going to put into... let's put her into low B tier. So, Jinxed Selena, she doesn't do a whole bunch, right? But she also does a whole bunch. Let me explain. So, the way she works is that when you trigger her ultimate, she triggers her special. So, what does her special do? Her special heals herself by 20% of her own max HP if she is below 100% health, but if she is at 100% health, she heals a teammate. So, she has a healer aspect that doesn't work as long as 2 targets get hit, right? The moment 2 targets get hit, the moment AoE damage gets introduced, she's useless as a healer. So she cannot compete with an Aiona in healing. She doesn't quite deal a lot of damage, but she does have one upside, and that is the increased damage taken major buff on her ultimate, where I believe it's 6 or 10 seconds she increases the damage a target takes. So she is fine to play around with, but I don't see her making any waves at any point in time, just because of the fact that, yeah, her kit, it is too unfortunate that she doesn't have like a self-heal mechanic for herself and then could heal your teammates. Like most of the time you're gonna end up with Jinxed Selena probably healing herself as soon as any type of damage get introduced. Okay, now for the very first controversial decision, Lamia on number 6. Lamia is, in my opinion, the 6th best unit in the game. So what does Lamia do and how do we justify it, alright? So Lamia does a whole crap ton of magic damage. It does not matter if it's AoE because she can hit up to 8 targets, or if it's single target because she can hit 1 target 8 times, even though it's like less damage, but it's still a crap ton of damage. And that is what Lamia does, right? She does a whole bunch of damage. Then you have a very, very unique special which allows you to lifesteal during the Blood Moon, which means that if you move into a Blood Moon with Lamia or activate Lamia's ultimate during a Blood Moon, she'll basically full heal herself. And then you also have one of the strongest specials in the game. And that special says that every time she hits 8 targets, which means with a bounce attack being able to bounce the 4 targets, usually every 2 basic attacks, you also shoot out a bat. And that bat is guaranteed to crit. This is very important because that is a major source also of her damage, because her ultimate summons 8 of these bats if it hits 8 targets, meaning you're guaranteed 8 crits on top of all the damage she already deals. As well as when you get like the Philosopher's Stone upgraded, she'll be able to easily trigger the extra effect for the 300% damage, but it is a long way to level 5. I have to know, I don't have a level 5 artifact yet. I am 5 off of the Eye of Truth to level 5, if you're curious. So yeah, Lamia, huge damage, huge lifesteal, and she is number 6, alright? She's not number 7, she's not number 8, she's not number 9 now. No, she is number 6, okay? Keep that in mind. So, one thing that you could say to a degree holds back Lamia is she doesn't do enough damage. It doesn't even make any sense, right? Like, there is not a lot of arguments you can find against Lamia. She is just a really good unit. The only reason she's not top 5 is because there's 2 units that are better than her, right? That is the simplified only reason she's not up there. Okay. Limine. Lamia 2.0. What do we feel about Limine? Unfortunately, we don't feel that much. So, let me give you a scenario. I already did it on the live stream, but I think it's quite a good metaphor. So Limine has really high peaks and really low valleys. If Limine can kill a target, if Limine can get her blood frenzy stakes going, then you're in dreamland. Everything is going well. You're having a party. You're having a blast. You can use the ultimate again, and then it stays on your hand, and then you can use it again and again and again and again, and you feel like Winter Soldier and Marvel Rivals. But if she doesn't kill, nothing happens, right? You're in depression territory. So depending on the piece of content, if your Limine cannot secure kills, be it because enemies cannot die, be it because she is too weak to kill, Limine sucks, right? Really high peaks, really low valleys. If you can use her effectively, she's incredible. But we already talked about the fact that you cannot cycle her ultimate. What that means is no matter when you use a Limine ultimate, it always stays on your hand. So you also cannot get rid of a Limine ult to get to another ult. It's fantastic when she works and is a big demerit if she doesn't work. So yeah, really high peaks, really low valleys. I hope you understand what Limine is all about. Whew. Okay, Lorelei. How do I feel about Lorelei? So me personally, I'm a big fan of Lorelei, but I will be giving you an objective opinion on what a Lorelei can and can't do for you. First off, her main point of focus is going to be non-boss fight content as well as PvP. What she has is her basic attack. Her basic attack is one of, if not the strongest basic attack in the game. And that is because in her standard form, she is a mage that shoots a sleep-inducing wave. And that wave, even though it doesn't look like much, it has incredible range, incredible width. And the way it works is every fourth basic attack, the moment she applies the fourth stack of her siren song, which is what she calls it when she hits someone with the basic attack, these units fall asleep. And they don't just fall asleep for 1 second or 2 seconds, no, they fall asleep for 5 seconds. So it is one of the, she is one of the strongest units when it comes to shutting down enemies just by not even using her ult. Just that constant application of the siren song debuff, it sets enemies to sleep so much. If you can just place her properly and let her hit as many targets as possible, she shuts enemies down. On top of that, you also have the rest of her kit, where she can transform into a single target, basic attack, melee focused assassin. And that assassin has a different basic attack. Rather than the AoE sleep, all of a sudden you have really high single target damage. We're talking 500% plus when you start upgrading her basic attack. And then she just shreds, right? Also, she has a passive where when she hits a sleeping enemy, not only does she deal 50% more damage, but she also ignores magic resistance, which means overall, you can imagine it like this. You take your attack and you put it against the enemy defense. Your attack has to overcome the enemy defense, and then whatever's left over is the damage you actually deal. If you penetrate magic resistance, there's obviously a bigger part of your damage that gets left over at the end of the day, which means Lorelei is going to be doing more damage. She also cannot be set to sleep, which isn't quite as important, and she also cannot wake up enemies. So the way sleep works is, sleep has two scenarios. Either the timer runs out and the units wake up, or you deal 25% of their max HP of a unit in damage, then the unit naturally wakes up, but Lorelei does just circumvent that. On top of all of that, during Lorelei's ultimate, enemies cannot awake from sleep. The important part here though is it doesn't mean enemies cannot awaken after 25% damage. No, enemies do not wake up when Lorelei ults. If you send someone to sleep and then it says, let's say it has a 5-second duration and you wait out 4 seconds, you only have 1 second on the sleep. You activate Lorelei's ultimate and all of a sudden this 1 second sleep goes to 12 seconds, because you can add an additional 11 seconds on top, as well as even more if Lorelei is able to secure some kills and stay in her ult form. So what works really well in story is, for example, setting enemies to sleep and then moving with her to a target that isn't asleep, which sets the target asleep, and the targets she already set asleep are going to stay asleep. A long story short, a lot of damage, a lot of potential, and really, really, really good if you have a Fleeting Bella. So Fleeting Bella, activate Fleeting Bella into Lorelei first, then set enemies to sleep, then use Lorelei to prolong the sleep, and then start dealing some crazy, crazy damage. Okay, we yapped too much about Lorelei, but I guess you can see I do like the character. Mass. High B tier. So, you know what? Low A. Okay, so let's talk about Mass and why she is or isn't good. Number one, Mass is suicidal. That is what you need to know. The reason why Mass, quote unquote, sucks, and here she's called M.ass, massive ass, is because of the fact that when you use her ultimate, she dies. If a unit dies, she takes her own Blood Soul stat or Blood Soul recovery stat with her, which means you regenerate less Blood Souls, meaning you can use less ultimates, overall making your team less powerful. So the only scenarios in which you want to use a Mass are one of two. Number one, you can use Mass and her Explosion, which also gets stronger because she can mark targets to take more damage, but you use her Explosion to kill something. If you kill something of equivalent or higher value than a Mass, then Mass is a win. If Mass fails to kill, Mass is ass. And then the second scenario is you play her in a piece of content that is super quick. Like, for example, we had a Night of the Hunt where there was a 60-second kill challenge, and you could then just use Mass's massive damage in fights. Like, if a fight ends and it's super short, it doesn't matter if Mass dies or not, right? So if you can use her effectively, she works quite well. And she's also a good off DPS. You can just keep her on the field as long as possible and then at some point just use her ultimate, because her ultimate actually goes down from a 10 cost all the way to a 0 cost, and 0 cost ultimates are always great. Okay, Nicole. Nicole doesn't do a whole bunch. I gotta be honest with you. Like, she has a nice moon. She is a assassin, she dashes around the battlefield and she applies bleeds. But those bleeds feel more like single target bleeds rather than AoEs, which you kind of prefer from like a Darcias. Her ult also at the beginning is really nice. It costs 2, then 3, then 4, and then 5. So for 2 cost, really good. For 3 cost, really good. For 4 cost, 5 cost, no. So that is kind of how Nicole works kit-wise. So there's just nothing where you were like, I wish I had a Nicole. If I only had a Nicole, man, I would be looking so much better. So that's kind of the reason why she's only like towards end of A tier, right? She's a great unit, just not particularly needed anywhere, right? All right, now main character number 1, Noah. Noah has a nice passive, all right? His passive allows him to heal for 25% of any damage he deals. Great, pretty good. We all like that. But he doesn't really do a lot of damage. He is a fighter, and you're gonna get the ability to replace him super, super fast, either with a tank or with any other fighter that you're gonna get your hands on, like, for example, Ottavia. So Ottavia is a bit of a weird one, but we're gonna rank Ottavia towards the top of A. And the reason for that is Ottavia has a very interesting passive. Her passive allows her to become untargetable for 4 seconds every 20 seconds the moment she drops below 40% HP, or it's 60, it's 40 or 60, I'm sorry. And then the moment she drops below the moment she drops below 40%, she gains 60% lifesteal. And that lifesteal is what's gonna allow her to go back from like 40 to 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, even 100% HP if you can make her crit or use her abilities. And that can be really valuable. It means she can, for example, solo survive in content where you don't want to bring a healer, but your frontline unit is getting hit anyway, as well as especially in PvP. Now, what ties Ottavia all together is the fact that we have really strong magic damage dealing units in this game, like Thebold, like Lamia, like Dalcarlo, like I.Agares. And Ottavia applies a increased magic damage taken up debuff, where the target takes 30% more magic damage for 6 seconds. So she is valuable, she is viable, but she's not like top tier. So that is Ottavia for you. Now, Pavana Banana. What about the guild shop unit? How good is she? Is she worth the grind? Should you worry about her at all? What is going on with Mrs. Pavana? The answer is not a whole lot, but also there is a lot going on with her. Okay, let me explain. So she is like Dalcarlo, but worse, alright? Pavana is like a Dalcarlo, though worse. She has the same shutdown. Yes, her shutdown is slightly longer, but her shutdown is also more awkward to use. Where if you use Pavana's ultimate, rather than any other ultimate where you can determine the circle where you want to place it, Pavana only targets it around a target. So if you can select a target, but there's nobody like directly around her, so pretty much your target is in the middle of the circle, which just can be really awkward to place, and usually it's way better to have targets at the end of the circuit to hit more. So she's pretty awkward to use to try to hit as many targets as possible, so she can apply the sleep, because of the fact that her sleep actually does, you could say, something special, where when a unit awakens from their sleep, naturally they deal 15% less damage, and if they get awoken from the sleep by your team dealing 25% max HP damage, then they take more damage. So she can apply all damage down to stall and to like kind of stop enemies from doing stuff, or she can make your team deal even more damage against these units if they're already on like a hot streak, right? So Pavana is to a degree like Lorelei, like Dalcarlo, but worse than the both of them, because while she also has the ability to shut down enemies with her special, the issue is her special is a straight line. So most of the time it's going to hit like one target in the front, maybe a fighter in the back, maybe a marksman in the back, but it doesn't usually lead to a whole lot, though that doesn't mean she's useless. Most of the time you're going to just throw her into a PvP defense. The reason why you throw her into a PvP defense is because PvP is all about randomness. It is so much easier to attack than it is to defend. If your defense can somehow win because Pavana lands a lucky sleep, then that is better than a defense that is static and just gets beaten 100% of the time, right? A defense that loses all the time is worse than a defense that wins a 1 in 10, right? So randomness can be quite good, and she is at least worthy to pick up once, even if it's just for the Pokédex with your arena coins. Alright, Piera. Piera is actually in C tier, let me explain. If the devs are listening, and I also obviously send a separate message the moment we have like a bit of a closer connection, Piera is bugged. Piera does not work. Piera is trash. Trash, right? So what Piera does is she summons. Wow, a summoner summoning summons. That's a lot of summons. But what she does is she summons these totems, and these totems are supposed to become stronger. Summon 1 totem, totem shoots. Summon 2 totems, totems shoot laser. Summon 3 totems, totems shoot laser that bounce. Should look good, should work well, has then the ability to also focus fire with her ultimate, as well as during her ultimate make the attack speed of other summons higher. Big problem, she cannot summon 3 summons. The moment Piera summons her 3rd summon, her 2nd summon gets destroyed. So there's never a scenario where you're able to take advantage of her actual kit. So Piera is glitched, Piera is broken at the moment, which is why we have to judge her in C. Technically even Cain tier, but Cain, he's trash, alright? So yeah, that is the problem with Piera, and then we already briefly mentioned it. I don't like her passive. Her passive is too bad. If her passive was a permanent thing, it would be great, but only during the ultimate, which only has a 6-second window, is not enough. It is not enough to justify in her in like a summoner comp. Okay, next up, Ressa. Ressa is going to go into high/medium A tier. What does Ressa do? Why do I like her so much, and why you shouldn't underestimate her? So as we already talked about with Mass, any ultimate that can get to 0 cost is a good ultimate. And the way Ressa works is she has pretty much the same talent as well as the same special. Her talent says she starts out and then she naturally gains crit rate every time she crits, and her talent says she naturally gains crit rate the longer the fight goes on. So overall, a Ressa on her own can get up to, I believe it's like a 90% crit chance by herself, as well as also having her ultimate guarantee crits, so already perfect synergy with Philosopher's Stone. The moment you upgrade it to 5, she is a prime candidate. And what she does on top of all of this is, not only does she reduce her own ult cost from a super expensive 10 down to 4, based on how long the fight is, the longer the fight goes, the less Ressa's ult cost. She also further reduces her ult cost from 4 down to 0 based on how many ultimates you use from other allies. So for example, imagine this combo. You're like 30 seconds into the fight, you start off with a Bella ultimate, then you use a Acapella ultimate, and then a Dalcarlo ultimate, and all of a sudden, Ressa's ultimate only costs 1. Now imagine that in a Blood Moon, all of a sudden Ressa's ult costs 0. Then you can use Ressa's ultimate again to, for example, use another Dalcarlo ult. So Ressa's ult, while she doesn't do the craziest amount of damage herself, can be used to use more ultimates during the Blood Moon, obviously her own ultimate included. What does her ult do? Besides guaranteeing a crit, it also does big single target damage. So Ressa, big fan, and she does deserve the term Star Destroyer. Okay, Spectral Gilrain. He's kinda ass. I don't know. Like, even in PvP, you don't see Spectral Gilrain. And one thing that holds Spectral Gilrain back is for him to become truly powerful, he needs to kill with his ultimate. So if there's nothing to kill, he's in the same boat as Limine, he is already way worse. And even then, his teleportation is awkward because it doesn't go to the target you want, but to the target closest to the target you actually select, which is kind of weird. And then he also doesn't really put up any great numbers, right? Like, he's like Hati, but he doesn't do a whole lot. He also doesn't have, for example, the shutdown of like of Prime Gilrain rather than the Spectral version. So I don't put a lot of value into Spectral Gilrain. He hasn't been able to do anything for me, and I haven't really seen him used anywhere to like any great extent, not even in PvP. Okay, Selena. So Selena and Jinxed Selena. So Selena has seen a bit of an uprise in usage, and that is because of her ability to increase her own ultimate damage. So if she attacks and every time she triggers her special, she gives herself 2 stacks of Shadow Mark. Shadow Mark is a exclusive stack to Selena, which increases the damage of her final ultimate. So the longer the fight, the more damage Selena does. She does good damage with her basic attack, and then at some point you can pretty much use her nuke ultimate. So she's really good as like an off DPS. I used her, for example, during the Prophecy event, but overall, you know how stuns hold Joan back? Yes, stuns hold Joan back, but they also hold Selena back. It is awkward to use because during a boss fight you cannot stun. And I gotta be honest, sleep, morph are just better options to deal with units during the story rather than a stun. And even though while the synergy is there between Joan, Selena and Triss, it never led anywhere. Like a stun comp, like stun team comp at the moment, it isn't a thing, right? Stun team comp doesn't quite exist. Okay, Seth. Number 9. Seth is the 9th strongest unit in the game, and the only reason why she's not top 5 is because there's a healer. That's better, right? That's the only thing holding Seth back, but there's also a cause which could move Seth and let her trade with that healer places, and that is very specifically mentioned in Seth's ultimate. Seth's ultimate doesn't only reverse time, which is super overpowered, but it also purifies, which is great. So if there's debuffs, you can purify them, but then it also subverts reduced HP recovery as well as HP recovery block. So should those ever come into need, there is only Seth who can deal with that, and then she is going to be your prime time pick. Seth overall is still tied for first or second strongest healer in the game. If you need to build 3 teams, you build Seth. If you only need to build 1 team, you are not going to bring Seth. That is the reason why she's on number 9 rather than in the top 5. Because in single team content, you're not going to bring a Seth. The moment it turns two team content and you need a healer, Seth is there. She is her. Booby eyes, huh? Okay. Seti. Yeah, Seti's trash. You're not going to use her. Not a lot of damage, bad base stats, doesn't really do a whole lot. That's her for you. Alright, Cyrene. We didn't have a lot, but I spent as much time as possible trying to test around and play around with Cyrene. And Cyrene's justification for S tier is Van Helsing, as well as also the potential she has for the future. Cyrene only works with marksmen. Cyrene has the Dark Intentions buff, and that Dark Intentions buff buffs the basic attack as well as also changes the targeting and increases the range of marksman. So Cyrene works really well together with Noah and Van Helsing. And then if Celine and Triss ever become relevant, Cyrene becomes relevant with them too. She's obviously a marksman herself, so she also at least buffs herself. If you, like, one of the strongest combos you can pull off and one of the most disgusting time-worn teams consists of you started off with an Acapella, follow it up with a fleeting Bella that goes into your Van Helsing to then boost that Van Helsing further with Cyrene. It is the strongest buffed character you can ever make, and Cyrene is part of that, right? So if you can bring Cyrene and you have a benefit for making Van Helsing retarget Cyrene is incredible. If you can bring her and if you can use her effectively, she's amazing. But she's heavily tied to your marksman, right? If you don't have like a lot of good marksmen on your account or you don't like to use marksman, then Cyrene won't be doing as much for you. Now, on the note of should you go for more copies of a Cyrene or should you wait, I gotta be honest with you here, we're gonna have minimum 3 months before we see the next Ancestral Vault character. So in the guild menu, there's 3 characters. We have Cyrene as the first, it's gonna be a second, and the third is most likely an Ancestor. But listen to this, in my opinion, it's minimum 3 months before we get the first. More likely something like 4, 5, or even 6 months with the next Ancestral Vault character. Most likely, I mean, it just makes sense, but I'm speculating here. That the next character arrives on the half-year anniversary, and then, you know, with the great finale being the 1-year anniversary would be Dracula. So do not feel scared investing into multiple Cyrenes. Building her is worth it. Do not feel scared, you don't have to save your meat for any other future upcoming characters because they're not going to be anytime soon. It doesn't make any sense from like a business or gameplay or whatever perspective you might want to call it. Bada bing, bada boom, bada bang. The reason why Dalcarlo is number 3 is because Starry-Eyed Aiona is number 2. If you look for a healer, you look for Starry-Eyed Aiona. If there's anything you've learned through playing multiple boss fights and the like, the ability to reposition can be game deciding, can be fight deciding. While also, the ability to reposition can ruin you. You have to be careful, right? Starry-Eyed Aiona is especially vulnerable for making mistakes with replacements if you pair with a Bella, because Bella is a range tank, which means if you have a melee tank, the tank is again going to run out in front and continue blocking, but if you're not careful with how you use your Starry-Eyed Aiona ult, you might end up in a scenario where all of a sudden your Acapella is your tank and she's just getting shredded, right? But regardless of all of that, we've already briefly mentioned her with Friedrich, she has the ability to boost her own shield strength by having given someone a shield before. She has one of the best specials in the game, which is a permanent shield application every X amount of seconds to the unit in front of her, which most of the time turns out to be your tank, or if you use a tank and a fighter in the front lane, should be your fighter, because keep in mind, your fighter takes the aggro from the tank, and your fighter usually is more squishy than your tank, and you don't want to lose units in like a mass scenario. So yeah, overall, incredible shields can help you survive some stuff that shouldn't really be survived. The ability to move out of the way of abilities is incredible, as well as then also on top of that, the ability to heal. As long as someone is shielded, Starry-Eyed Aiona is going to heal them. That's all we need to say, and she has earned her spot up there. Theophane. Theophane is the highest ranked A unit, and one of those reasons is he's just become more and more useful as like the game went on. So what he has is incredible CC. That CC refers to a over 10-second taunt. Now, taunt doesn't sound that great. Oh, it's just gonna attack the tank. But keep in mind, taunt is in the same category as morph, sleep, stuns, and the like. Taunt is going to stop any channels, any charges, anything like that. So in the same vein, like a Dalcarlo could stop someone. You can also just jump with Theophane, do the replacement strat, has seen a lot of play during Guild Hunt. And what Theophane can do is also he can also build up extra shields. He can build up extra shields because he has a white shield, he has a black shield, and then he can let one of those get destroyed, and then during his ultimate give himself a bigger shield, give your team a bigger shield. So Theophane is, at least at the moment, a better or more useful tank than a Friedrich, just based on most like, yeah, the taunt from the ultimate. It is really useful, and at 3 it is really cheap. So yeah, do not underestimate Theophane, he's ballin', alright? Now, Theophane into Theobald. Theobald, where's Theobald? Theobald is really high. So, okay, first off, why is Theobald that high? That is, let's talk about a bit of the history, is usually you have Acapella for buffing, and then you kind of had nothing, right? Then you had Acapella for buffing, Dalcarlo came out, you had Acapella, Dalcarlo, both of them could be used in separate teams as a buffer, and then Theobald cred up, and all of a sudden you had a buffer for team 1 in Dalcarlo, buffer for team 2 in Acapella, and then buffer for team 3 in Theobald. Now, what does that refer to? Technically, Theobald isn't a buffer, but a debuffer, though it is the same thing. Theobald applies negative crit rate resistance, which means an enemy becomes 40% more vulnerable to crits, which means overall just anybody that hits that enemy gets a 40% crit rate buff. Simplified, right? And on top of that, you also do really good damage with your abilities, as well as having one of the strongest passives in the game, which is over the duration of a fight building up to 50% extra crit damage, right? Anything that builds up over the duration of the fight is really strong. Like Limine can make herself magically stronger with her Blood Frenzy, I.Agares gets more magic damage, Theobald gets more crit damage, and then Gilrain, he just does more damage with basic attacks with his special, right? So yeah, that is why Theobald is there. A little bit of a hit towards Theobald, I guess, would have been the release of Bella, because we now have a proper support. But if you've played Clan, if you've seen Clan Hunt, the combo between Dalcarlo and Theobald together is disgusting. When it comes to really big AoE damage, having a rotation of starting off with a healer or a tank and then moving into a Theobald to start applying the debuff, and then using a Dalcarlo on top, as well as then potentially cycling in another Dalcarlo, it's a lot and a lot of damage. Okay, Ami, number 10. Ami is number 10, and the only reason she's not top 5 is because Bella exists. If Bella didn't exist, she would be number 1. But it's kind of the same scenario. If you only need to run one team and one tank, most of the time you're better off using Bella because of the reasons we've talked about, as well as like the importance of summons. But if you need to run 2 tanks, if you need to play 2 teams, Ami is there. As well as also, she has something that nobody else has. She has the ability to push around enemies. While Augustine can pull enemies in, Ami can push them around. She can shift them around into more favorable positions. Like, for example, if you have a flame on the battlefield, you can push enemies into the flame. If enemies are spread out, you can put them together for more effective AoE damage. So she has something unique in her kit, and on top of all of that, she is incredibly good at resisting damage. Mostly the magic kind, because she naturally takes less magic damage, but if she activates her ultimate, she reduces all damage taken down, right? Or like reduces all damage taken up. You know what I mean, right? She can just massively reduce her own damage taken, as well as also heal herself, and on top of that put up some really good damage numbers. So she's not just your passive flower lily in a greenhouse, she can actually hit back. Alright, now we're getting to the last 5, huh? Transcendant Hati, number 7. Alright, so Transcendant Hati on number 7. Why? How could I do that? What am I doing? Am I tripping? The reason or the answer is no. So Hati is good, don't get me wrong. She is fantastic. She is absolutely disgusting in single target content. Let's first talk about the drawbacks though, and that is because Hati actually she isn't as effective doing story, and if you don't have a steroid Aiona on your Hati, you might even end up losing her, so you have to be more careful with playing her. But once Hati gets going, oh boy does she get going. We've already briefly talked about it, but to make the most out of your Hati, you do need setup in an I.Agares, in a Darcias, in potentially a Dalcarlo, adding all these debuffs together for you to deal more damage. But once you do, oh my, she hits like a truck. And that's one of the reasons why she's up there. She is just pretty much probably the second hardest single target hitting, maybe even the highest single target hitting damage dealer in the game, and that's the whole justification for why she's there. She is also always going to become more relevant the moment a DOT character releases. The moment another damage over time related character releases, Hati automatically is there. And that is because the ultimate does not consume DOTs. No, it just takes the DOT stacks that are currently there and triggers them 2 times. So for example, if you have a 50% burn, or like 50% damage burn, then all of a sudden you're going to deal 100% extra damage, right? And that's not even the whole of it, and that is because Hati has the most disgusting debuff in the entire game, and that is Pestilence. Her Pestilence can go up to 500% of Hati's attack every 2 seconds. Once it goes past 7 stacks, so past 350% damage, all of a sudden she's also dealing that damage in a 2.5 meter AoE radius, and if that wasn't enough, she also reduces the attack speed of whoever gets hit with her Pestilence debuff. And then she can also trigger her own Pestilence, right? So I hope you get why she's there, why she's justified to be there. Now, this might make a lot of you sad and a lot of you mad, but Noah is only S tier. He is not top 10. He is very close. He would be number 11, but he isn't in the top 10. Okay, so Noah. Yes, Noah can be used as a tank. Yes, Noah can be put into the front line. Yes, Noah's synergy with Bella is quite great, but let's be honest here. The synergy between like a Cecia and a Bella is more important than the synergy between a Bella and a Noah. Noah, he doesn't really have a defined place, kind of. Like, Noah is a mix between good AoE and really good single target, but nothing specified in particular. But he's really good as an off DPS, right? If Noah has something to kill and he can build up his summons quickly and then uses a ultimate to give himself a 50% damage buff and then get the summons back again and then attack, he can become really, really good, but not like top 10 rise. Like it's just that there's 10 units better than him, not that he's a bad unit. So do not see this as like any TR Noah slander. It is just an objective look at what TR Noah brings to the table. Don't forget though, the moment a OP summoner releases, Noah is there because he is still a summoner. Triss. High B is all we can get her. Like, high B is all we can give to Triss, and the reason for that is because she hasn't yet shown promise in anything particular, and that is also because she's kind of awkward. She is a single target damage dealer that relies on the application of stun to deal more damage, but if you need a single target damage dealer, you are not going to be able to apply stun because you're playing a boss fight. So that is kind of what holds her back, though she could see an uprising in importance due to 2 factors. Number 1, Cyrene existing because she's a marksman, and then number 2, Fleeting Bella existing because, funnily enough, Triss's basic attack as well as her ultimate all count as basic attacks. So if you boost a Triss with a Bella, you're getting massive payout during her ultimate. Unfortunately though, it's just single target, and if it's a boss, it won't be doing much. Now you've already probably guessed it, but Van Helsing is the 5th strongest unit in the game for now. He's proven his worth over and over, and while he is more awkward to use in story, with the introduction of Fleeting Bella, it has become easier than ever before to use a Van Helsing successfully during the story. And you know what the greatest part about him is? No matter what the boss's mechanics are, if your damage is high enough, you do not need to care. If your damage is high enough, if your Van Helsing hits hard enough, which he can with the proper setup, you do not need to care. He just shreds, right? That is just who he is. He just shreds. He is one of the only characters besides Lorelei in the game that have the potential to infinitely ult for a one-time cost. Yes, 6 cost is steep, but 6 cost is nothing compared to an ultimate that lasts indefinitely. And the reason why it's also so important is because in both PvP and PvE he has his space. If Van Helsing can kill with his ultimate, he is disgusting. He is disgusting because his ultimate does not stop. So for example, Bella summons, Van Helsing kills them, Van Helsing continues ulting, Van Helsing shreds. You've probably already seen some of that in my yeah, in my Fleeting Bella showcase yesterday. If you haven't yet, you can check that out if you see some more if you want to see some more Van Helsing madness. But just trust me when I say Van Helsing is the very best spirit echo pick you can pick. If you don't know what to do with your 200 spirit echo, there's currently only 3 options: Van Helsing, Dalcarlo, and Lamia. And out of the 3 of them, Van Helsing is the most important, and that is because he does the most with getting extra attack. He becomes the strongest with extra siphons on top. And then lastly, we have Yggdrasil, and Yggdrasil is going to go into B. He has shown some promise with the ability to move around on the battlefield, but you have someone who does it better in Starry-Eyed Aiona, or just the ability to move the enemies around rather than yourself with a Theophane or with a T-Ami. And while he does self-heal, it is based on how much HP he's lost rather than a fixed max HP percentage, which would be better for him. Though in certain scenarios, I guess it can make him survive, but he just doesn't really do a whole lot. He has like a rather tiny range in making your team move, and then he jumps in, and then like he heals them up a bit and reduces damage taken, but then it all kind of stops. He is a tank, but there's just better ones, right? Like the tank order really goes Bella, T-Ami, Theophane, Friedrich, and then Yggdrasil. Though I gotta be honest with you though, he's at least as valuable as a Jestel somewhat, right? Somewhat. Okay, so this concludes our hour-long video and the most comprehensive, in-depth tier list and meta-analyzation you're going to find in Silver and Blood. Thank you all so much for watching.